Welcome back to Maryland Family Matters. My name is Jeff Trimbath. I'm the president of the Maryland Family Institute, and we are here continuing our conversation this week with Liana Graham, who is a marriage and family apologist, a Gen Z influencer. Liana, welcome back to Maryland Family Matters.
Thank you for having me.
So, last time when we were together, you talked about some of the cultural influences regarding marriage and family, specifically in social media, and the assumptions that these quick videos had that were detracting from the traditional family, uh, often based on assumptions that were unexamined or, to put it charitably, or dubious. And so let's talk a little bit more about that. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about what would your advice be to young people as they're thinking about their future, uh, specifically with regard to this desire that we would say God has placed in their heart to have relationship with others. This is part of how He's created them in His image and likeness, grounded in the Trinity. Right? There's relationship in there in the Godhead,
Mm,
and we reflect that. But also the sense of eternity. The
mm,
writer of Ecclesiastes says God's put eternity in our hearts, and so there is this sense in which we are created for relationship forever with our Savior, but then with our spouse. That's why marriage is a lifetime. What
mhm,
what would what would your advice be for young folks who are in this environment, facing these cultural questions and sort of the cultural cynicism towards
mhm.
marriage and family? Talk about what your advice for them would be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you've rightly noted, marriage and its significance, both socially, politically, etc., civilizationally, is rooted in an anthropological fact, which is that we human beings are created for relationship, ultimately grounded in our desire to be in a relationship with the Lord, but we are also created for relationship with other people. And so, in light of that fact, I would say my very first piece of advice would be to any young person or any person ever, like at any stage of their life, to recognize cultivating relationships as an essential component to your well being and flourishing, which is
Mm,
not something that you kind of put off into the future. Perhaps marriage will happen, perhaps it won't for you. Obviously, you have to take practical steps to make that a reality and to pursue that. But something that you cannot live without is relationship, full stop. Which typically, honestly, from my personal experience, when young people intentionally pursue relationships generally, I think that's when we start seeing the more organic creation of, like, the meet cutes. Like, cute boy meets cute girl. They're both single. They both are attracted to one another. But unfortunately, we live in a very connected social world on social media digitally, but we're more isolated, more disconnected than ever. So I would say to any young person who's going to university, who's even still in high school, there it is so important to have strong relationships with other people, strong communities. For the Christians, it's usually pretty easy to find because you've got the youth groups, you've got your church groups, you've got outings with your friends, you've got clubs at school. But it's as you grow up, like and become enter into adulthood, you find that those spaces are increasingly diminishing, which is why it's like my first advice for people who are looking for a spouse, I'm like, have you tried going to church? Because, like, other
uh,
than the bar and like the workplace, I don't know where else you're meeting people. Also, like social media, maybe like dating apps, but again, those are really designed and in practice just to facilitate just casual flings and hookups. So obviously,
yes.
it's not just exposing yourself to more social settings, but social settings that are likely going to be filled with people who are as intentional about dating and marriage as you are. So
Yes.
like-minded people, conservative groups, conservative student groups, like whatever it may be, we need to approach our lives understanding how important relationship is. We were made for relationship with God and others.
Let me ask a question on behalf of some young women that I know, and the question is this: in a traditional sort of setting, the young woman would wait for the young man to ask her uh, to go out on a date or to ask for marriage, her hand in marriage. Um, what would be your advice to young women who are wanting that to happen to them, but it hasn't happened yet? Is it appropriate to break that rule
Mm,
as they're wanting to pursue marriage or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's probably something to evaluate on a case by case basis. Like technically with my husband and I, he didn't ever really like fully ask me out, and this is something that I kind of just harp on him still to this day, but we were both young, we were both new Christians. Like there was a point when we both just kind of knew we liked each other and we kept seeing each other. And so it's typical that in settings where you're seeing somebody often, if you're asking them to hang out as a friend, there will be a natural chemistry that will be very difficult to ignore. So I would say just like act with discernment and evaluate that on a case by case basis. But it should be pretty obvious if a guy is interested in you. And if he is, but he's not making the first move, I think that that's something to talk to him about. Like I would be open to like saying, "Hey, you've sent me all these signals, but you haven't said anything," and just be upfront. Like I think we need good communication. I actually know friends who have done that, and it actually ended up that the guy was holding back for some maybe personal reason, and then they kind of just stopped seeing each other. So it was good for both parties. So I think if that's happening, if somebody's sending you mixed signals, but they're not being upfront with their intentions, just ask them about it and be like, desire good communication and let them see what they have to say on that front. But yeah.
Thank you. That's great. We have some questions that were sent in by some young ladies who follow us on social media, and I'd love to just ask a couple of these of you, Liana, if that's okay. Um, the first is this phrase "trad wife influencer." Which I guess is uh, a title that you embrace. How do you balance the trad wife focus with your whole identity? And is that phrase a turnoff for some girls?
Yes, I think that the phrase is a turnoff for some people, which is actually why I use it. And the reason is because I think it's just a counterexample to the stereotypical caricatures that are created of traditional wives. And if we're thinking about what trad wife means, like literally, right, a
Yeah.
traditional wife. What is a
Hmm.
traditional wife? I think the narrow definition that used to be attached to the word was a woman who, a stay-at-home mom who dedicated her whole life to raising her kids. Now it's just flung around willy-nilly to accuse other people of spreading sort of a message that is upholding the patriarchy or spreading traditionalism in scare quotes as if tradition is a bad thing. It's like, okay, well, something has developed over hundreds of years and has lasted. It's almost as if maybe that's because it's a good thing. But okay, yes,
Yeah.
traditionalism and scare quotes. And so because trad wife has evolved as a pejorative, I think reclaiming it for me has been sort of a neutralizer because it's like, yeah, you're just throwing this around as an insult, but it's actually just a title I claim. What's wrong with embracing to some degree a traditional gender role in the household? For me, right? It's because I believe in putting my family first, putting my family above career. I currently work, and sometimes I get that pushback like, you work full time, so how can you be a trad wife? And my response to that is usually, well, I don't have kids. My husband and I are hopeful for children. And I know that the way that I view and approach my work will change when we have kids. So it's actually just that I'm living in a different season of my life than I would be if I had lots of children. And I think that confining Tradwife to just a very specific life script is not very practical because then you like me, I don't have children yet. Like, can I not be a traditional wife or something like
Yeah.
that? Again, I think that it's used to generally refer to conservative Christian women who are married. It's like, okay, I'm a conservative Christian woman who's married, and I don't consider it an insult. So,
So it strikes me as really a great example of what the left often does, which is they take a good term and they make it extreme. They give it an extreme caricature, and then they just redefine it. And
hmm
we let them do that. It's their view of a Christian is oftentimes negative, and we wouldn't say, well, we're therefore not a Christian. We would not embrace that title, right? We just have to show a better way of what it actually means. That's great.
hmm
Um, Another question that was sent in to us: who are some good influencers that girls should be following?
hmm Yeah. My answer to this, it almost feels like a cop out because the people that come to mind immediately are not social media influencers, but they're influencers insofar as they wield an influence in my life. And these are the women at my church, both in DC and back home in Toronto. The women who have deeply affected me as a young Christian woman have been the women at my church, because of the fact that, well, just like the virtues that they embody, the grace, the humility, the hospitality, the kindness, genuinely, like, these women will pray for you in a heartbeat if you ask, or welcome you into their home with no questions asked, and give you the best food you've ever tasted in your life. I mean, it's truly a type of love that I would love to exemplify also in my own life, and I look up to. And the reason why I mention specific people, is because I think it's actually not very fruitful to have social media influencers be like your number one mentors and role model. And I say this as somebody on social media. When somebody tells me that they look up to me or that I'm a mentor to them, I'm obviously flattered, but I think that the people who say that to me the most are the people in my own life, people who I am responsible towards. The problem with social media is that I'm not really, I mean, I would say I'm responsible for the things I say, but there's no mutual relationship there. There's no call and response that is so characteristic of a true relationship. And in order to be mentored by somebody, you need to actually know them, and you need to be accountable to them, and they have to be accountable to you. And that two-way accountability, I think, is missing in the relationship between a social media influencer and somebody who just follows them. So I'd actually tell young women to unplug from being totally influenced by people on social media and pursue those relationships with women in their church, one-on-one coffee chats, or meeting women in their home and seeing how they live their lives. Like, I've done that before, and it's like, wow, it's inspiring to see how you approach your day. And it's I would say most of the mentors that you will make that will have the most impact on your life will be the ones that you know personally in your churches, at your workplace, and in your communities, not the people that you find on social media.
That's great. Let's broaden the conversation out as we come to a close here, to talk about our culture, going from the personal to the culture. Um, what are some of the things that you're concerned about, thinking about right now, Liana, in terms of marriage and family among Gen Z? What are things that are keeping you up at night? What are things that you're writing about or talking about? Give us a preview of what you're thinking about.
Mm. What I've been thinking a lot about recently and writing a lot about recently is the relationship between fear and love.
Hmm.
And I wrote an article about this recently because I think that obviously the pro family movement, especially on the policy side, is very focused on reducing the risks associated with marriage. And obviously, bad policy has made marriage riskier. And our relationships have been fractured because of pornography on demand, and people are anxious and scared to be vulnerable with one another. And there are just enough, like the welfare penalties, and there are so many practical material things that make marriage riskier than remaining unmarried. But the other thing that needs to be said is that even if all those things were were remedied, marriage is still risky, technically.
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
insofar as intimacy is part of marriage, and intimacy requires vulnerability. And vulnerability is risk, right? Vulnerability is scary, especially for Gen Z, right? As I said, we are very connected in one sense of the word online, but we're lonelier than ever. And I think that's actually fueling the marriage crisis because we're not pursuing relationships which will from there be the bedrock that we end up finding the people who will become our spouse, etc. And so I think that part of the messaging that needs to be fixed is that, yeah, at the end of the day, I can talk all about how great marriage is, and it is. Like, I could increase the value of marriage and family in the eyes of other people, but the other part of the equation is decreasing Gen Z women's sensitivity to the things that scare them. And part of that is just telling them that if you want love, right? This is just a natural human thing. It's just reclaiming common sense. If you want love, love requires two things. It requires vulnerability and it requires mutual dependency. Two things that young women are petrified of right now. This idea
Yeah.
of, like, being dependent upon your husband materially or emotionally is terrifying to women because they hear stories of husbands who just divorced their wives after 20 years, which is horrible, right? And it's like, yeah, actually, we should do something to strengthen marriage then, instead of telling women, no, 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 shield yourself from the risk, shield yourself from the vulnerability. I think C.S. Lewis, he writes this in his book, A Grief Observed. And I mean, I'm paraphrasing. I wish I had the quote on hand, but he says something like, if you never want to be hurt, wrap your heart up in your
Mm,
chest and like never give it to anybody, but at the same time you'll also find that you will find yourself unable to love, unable to experience all the joys of human life. Like to love at all is to be vulnerable, he says. And that is
yeah,
so true. And so many young people, especially because of the way social media and the digital age has influenced our view of other people, are terrified of that. So that's the thing that's keeping me up at night, because I think even if we reduce the risks associated with marriage on a policy side, if young people remain absolutely petrified of vulnerability and dependency, they're still not going to get married. At the very least, they're not going to embrace the view of marriage that we as conservatives believe in, this covenantal lifelong union, which what does that require? I don't know, dependency. It's a union. My husband and I become one. That's like mutual dependency. So that's kind of also part of the messaging that I've been trying to help get out there and tell young women, you know what? Yeah, at the end of the day, it was scary and it is scary. And you know what? That's what makes it so fun. That's what makes it so rewarding. That's what makes it so purposeful and fulfilling. Um, Sometimes the greatest risks reap the greatest rewards. And I think that that's an element that's very much missing from the dialogue that I'd like to get back into the conversation.
Liana Graham, thank you so much for your insights and for that rousing, positive call to all of us, actually, to embrace vulnerability. And how do people find you if they want to follow your work? What's the easiest way for folks to be connected with you
Yeah,
so they
well,
can?
I'm on Instagram. You can find me at Liana Graham. It's just my name, two L's though, because the other usernames are taken. Apparently,
Oh,
my new surname is very popular. So, yeah, two L's, and I think Liana Gordon, my maiden name on X.
okay, great. Well, Liana Graham, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for your insight, for your defense of the institution of marriage, especially among young people, and for your example of faith and of being salt and light here for God's design and purpose in your generation. We're so encouraged. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. I had a pleasure. Thank you.